Henry VIII, the notorious King of England, had many enemies within and outside of his country. He predicted that he would even be invaded by the Holy Roman Empire following his split from Rome, and with this he had to build a large fortress on the south coast of his kingdom. But one of the most infamous enemies that the six-wifed King of England had, and successfully but brutally dealt with, was the Scottish King James V. Now James V was the father of Mary, Queen of Scots, and he was by all accounts a rather successful king, but he had been considered vindictive as he sought more wealth and power for his crown. But James's forces in Scotland were defeated heavily by the English army of King Henry VIII, and this greatly affected the Scottish king, and some believed that the stress caused by the defeat of his forces may have even caused or brought about his death quicker. But following his death, the remains of King James V were messed around with, and his coffin was opened a number of times, and his tomb was even at one point disturbed. But inside of a small royal burial vault inside of a ruined abbey in Edinburgh, some of the bones of King James V are found. But what happened when his coffin and tomb were opened? To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. King James V was born on the 10th of April 1512 in Linlithgow in Scotland, and he would become the King of Scotland from 1513 to 1542. He became the king when he was just a baby, following the death of his father, King James IV, in 1513. He was crowned king at just 17 months old, and he was so young a regency council was established to rule on his behalf until he became of age. And one person who helped was his mother, Margaret Tudor, the older sister of King Henry VIII. A power struggle broke out, as with most regency councils, and John Stuart, the Duke of Albany, and Archibald Douglas, the Earl of Angus, sought to gain possession and power from the young king. James's mother would later change her allegiance, and the Duke of Albany fled to France in 1524, but Archibald Douglas would later hold James V practically under house arrest, keeping the king under lock and key. James V took control of Scotland in 1528 after he escaped from his stepfather's imprisonment, and he would then exile him, and he seized Douglas's powerful lands for himself. Over his reign he would try to strengthen Scotland by controlling many royal estates and ensuring he oversaw the justice system, and he founded the College of Justice. He wanted to bring more order to the country, in particular in dangerous regions such as the Scottish borders. James V married twice, to two French noblewomen, Madeleine of Valois and later Mary of Guise, and he strengthened allegiances between Scotland and France. During his reign, there was a fledgling Protestant movement in Scotland, inspired by the work of Martin Luther in Europe, and James V was a staunch and devout Catholic, and he was granted the title of Defender of the Faith by the Pope. He even cracked down on heretics and had a number of people executed for their religious beliefs. His uncle, King Henry VIII, signed a peace treaty with him at some point throughout his reign, but James's reputation is varied. Some believe he was the poor man's king, and he stuck up for those at the bottom of society, but he was ultimately driven by wealth and increasing further money for the treasury. He was described by John Knox as, he was called of some, a good poor man's king, of others he was termed murderer of the nobility, and one that had decreed their whole destruction. Henry VIII, James's uncle, was urging him to dissolve monasteries and religious houses like he was, and James refused to listen to his uncle's words, and he also refused in 1542 to meet with King Henry VIII at York. This greatly offended Henry, and he then launched an invasion in Scotland. By this time, James V was already ill, and he was known in 1533 for having a sore face, and then later pox and fever. He later wrote to his wife in 1534 saying that he had never been as ill as he had previously been, but he had managed to recover. These repeated bouts of illness would have not given his immune system time to recover. But when King Henry VIII launched this invasion, he probably brought a huge amount of stress to the King of Scotland, making him not very well at all. James V hoped to invade England himself, but he was discouraged from doing so. But on the 24th of November 1542, the Battle of Solway Moss erupted between the English and the Scottish. James V's 18,000 Scottish troops advanced into England, and they were met by the English with around 3,000 men commanded by Lord Wharton. The battle was a shocking rout for the Scots, and the English managed to pen the Scots in near to a river, and they found themselves under intense fire and fighting. It's believed that many drowned in the river, and the battle was a complete disaster for King James V. He was not present at the battle, and he then withdrew to Falkland Palace. The effect that the defeat of the Battle of Solway Moss caused on James V was huge. He felt incredibly humiliated and was within days taken ill with a fever. He had, let's remember, already been seriously ill a short while before, and then he was informed days later that his wife had given birth to a daughter instead of a son, and it's believed that this crushed James V's will to live. And he had given up. He wanted a son to become his heir, and he was reported to have said that the House of Stuart came with a lass and will go with a lass. Inside of Falkland Palace, he continued to go downhill, and he took to his deathbed, and he died on the 14th of December 1542 at the age of 30, and was then succeeded by his daughter Mary, Queen of Scots. James V probably died from, it's believed, either cholera or dysentery, but the crushing defeat inflicted upon him by his uncle Henry VIII broke him, and historians for years have believed that shame or despair brought on by defeat could have finished him off. On the 7th of January 1543, King James V's body was taken from Falkland to the Forth Ferry at Kinghorn, and was then transported into Edinburgh, escorted by a funeral cortege. The funeral took place for King James V inside of Holyrood Abbey, and he was buried there in the choir at the heart of the church next to his first wife Madeline and two of his sons. Over his burial site, a stone tomb was created, and on this there was a lion, a crown, and a huge inscription in Roman letters. Alms were distributed to the poor of Edinburgh, and there was much ceremony around his tomb for some time. However, later King Henry VIII would launch a further attack upon Scotland, known as the War of the Rough Wooing, and his forces rampaged into Scotland, and specifically into Edinburgh. The English forces then caused a huge amount of damage to Holyrood Abbey, and they desecrated and destroyed the tomb of King James V. After the desecration, James V's body was re-embalmed, being dug out of the grave, and it was re-wrapped in a thick shroud known as a cerecloth. It was then moved to a new royal vault in the south-east corner of the nave of Holyrood Abbey during James VI's reign. The vault was accidentally found in January of 1683, and inside the vault it was discovered that James V's body was inside of a lead and wooden coffin, the lead coffin providing protection to his body, and the wooden coffin being the outer shell. His coffin was opened, and what was found was disturbing. It was stated that James V's flesh had turned black, presumably with decay and rot setting in, and there was still hair on his head. But 5 years after this, the coffin was opened again by an angry Protestant mob, and it was left open. And with this, James V's remains decayed further. In 1735, it was seen in this way, and then the lead coffin in 1768 of the king was stolen after the collapse of Holyrood Abbey's roof, and the king's bones were thrown out of the coffin, and they were thrown into a pile with the remains of other royals inside of the vault. In 1840, the bones of the royals were all collected and were then placed inside of a large coffin, all mixed together, and they were placed inside of a rebuilt royal vault in a corner of the ruined abbey. And still today that royal vault is there, inside the coffin containing James V's body. Well, his bones, and many others are in there. King James V was the nephew of King Henry VIII, and the English Tudor king dealt with the Scottish King James, a terrible defeat which may have led to his death. In the years following his death, his coffin was cracked open and smashed to pieces, as was his tomb, and still today his bones remain alongside the remains of others in the royal vault, in a mess within a coffin containing lots of other royals. Thank you for watching, and to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. And again, thank you so much for watching.